Amelia Clark thought she was uncovering the truth about a string of disappearances in her quiet hometown. What she didn't know was that Walter Ridge and Marcus Bell had been watching her for months, waiting for the perfect moment to turn the hunter into their final victim. Willow Creek had always seemed untouchable, the kind of small town that looked like it had been frozen in a postcard from decades past. On quiet evenings, the faint smell of fresh bread from the Nor bakery drifted through the air. People greeted each other by name at the grocery store, and the loudest noise at night was usually the wind rustling through the maple trees. The town's comfort came from its predictability. Nothing truly bad happened here. That illusion shattered on an October night that residents would speak of in hushed tones for years to come. It began with a call to the police station just after midnight. A neighbor, a retired teacher who lived across the street, had noticed something strange while letting her dog out. The back door of the blue-painted house 2 doors down was wide open. A dim light flickered inside, and a thin dark trail stretched from the doorway into the backyard, glistening faintly under the moonlight. It was the kind of scene that instantly triggered unease, the kind where your mind starts filling in possibilities before you even know the facts. When the first officers arrived, the air around the property seemed unnaturally still, as if the night itself was holding its breath. The front door was locked, but the back door remained ajar, swinging slightly in the cold wind. Inside, the living room told a story of chaos. A vase lay shattered on the floor, its water mixing with a sticky red stain. Photographs had been ripped from the walls, their frames broken, the smiling faces inside now bent and torn. The couch was pushed halfway across the room, and on the wooden floor were deep, desperate scratches, as though someone had been dragged away while fighting to hold on. Every step the investigators took revealed another layer of disturbance. In the kitchen, a chair had been knocked over, and a pot of water sat cold on the stove, as if someone had been interrupted mid-task. Upstairs, the bedrooms were in varying states of disarray, but one room in particular stopped everyone in their tracks. It looked untouched at first glance. The bed neatly made, the curtains drawn, but on the far wall, illuminated faintly by a streetlight outside, was a message smeared in dark, drying red. The letters were uneven, hurried and almost illegible, but one word stood out sharply: payback. There was no sign of the homeowner, 32-year-old Amelia Clark. Friends described her as warm, kind, and dependable. The sort of person who left small bouquets on neighbors' doorsteps just to brighten their day. She owned a small flower shop on Main Street, where she was known to remember every customer's favorite blooms. She hadn't been seen in 3 days, but because Amelia sometimes visited her sister in another town, no one had thought much of her absence until now. Forensics quickly identified the substance on the wall and the hallway floor. It was blood. Tests would later confirm it matched Amelia's type. The sheer amount suggested she had suffered a severe injury, possibly fatal. Yet without a body there was no certainty. The scene felt incomplete, like the middle of a violent story without a clear beginning or end. In the yard, a series of partial shoe prints led away from the back porch toward the fence, where a section of wood had been forced loose. Beyond the fence, in the damp soil of the alley, officers found tire tracks, fresh and deep, the kind left by a vehicle leaving in a hurry. The trail ended abruptly a short distance away, swallowed by the regular traffic of the main road. Whoever had been here knew how to vanish. The unease among the officers was palpable. Even the seasoned ones, who had seen their share of crime scenes, exchanged uneasy glances. It wasn't just the violence that unsettled them. It was the calculated mess, the feeling that everything had been left this way for a reason. The message on the wall wasn't just a taunt, it was a clue, one they didn't yet understand. That night, the house was sealed off, floodlights glaring against the autumn darkness as investigators worked. Residents gathered behind the police tape, their voices low, trading theories that grew darker with each retelling. The hated safety of Willow Creek was gone, replaced by something heavier. Fear had settled over the town like the early frost creeping across the grass. By morning, Amelia Clark's name was on everyone's lips. People who had bought flowers from her just days before now stared at her smiling face on missing person flyers, taped hastily to lampposts and windows. For now there were more questions than answers about the blood, the strange message, and the reason why such brutality had found its way to a place that had always felt untouchable. But one thing was clear: whatever had happened inside that house was not random, and it was far from over. The investigation moved quickly in the hours following the discovery of the scene. Officers combed through Amelia Clark's home again in daylight, hoping fresh eyes and better visibility might reveal what the harsh glow of floodlights had missed. The atmosphere inside the house felt no less oppressive than the night before. The smell of iron still lingered faintly, a sharp reminder of the blood found on the walls and floor. Every creak of the wooden steps sounded unnaturally loud in the empty rooms. Forensic teams began with the obvious evidence. The blood in the hallway was carefully collected and confirmed to match Amelia's type, but its pattern suggested she hadn't died instantly. A trail of smaller drops led toward the back door, as though she had been moving or dragged while still alive. The partial shoes scattered through the house were measured, photographed and compared. They seemed to come from two different pairs of footwear, one larger, likely a man's, and another smaller, possibly Amelia's own. That meant she had either been forced to move under her own power or had struggled before being taken. The backyard offered another promising lead. The tire tracks in the alley were documented in detail, and technicians were able to determine they had been made by a vehicle with worn treads on one side, possibly a sedan. The prints stopped abruptly, suggesting the driver had reversed quickly before speeding away. It was clear the abduction had been planned with efficiency. No wasted time, no obvious mistakes. While the physical evidence was being processed, detectives turned their attention to Amelia's life. Friends and relatives were interviewed, painting a consistent picture of a woman with no known enemies, no involvement in dangerous activities, and no reason anyone would want to harm her. Yet her last confirmed sighting was unsettling. A clerk at a gas station on the edge of town recalled seeing Amelia late in the evening 3 days before she disappeared. She had seemed distracted, constantly glancing at the parking lot outside as if watching for someone. She bought only a single bottle of water before leaving in a hurry. Security footage confirmed the sighting, but nothing unusual appeared in the background. No visible pursuer, no strange vehicles. The most puzzling discovery came from the garage. In a dusty cardboard box, shoved behind some old gardening tools, investigators found a stack of photographs. Each picture showed a different person. Men, women, even a few teenagers. None were family or friends that anyone recognized. On the back of each photograph, Amelia had written dates and cryptic notes in black ink. Some were just numbers. Others had brief phrases like 7:15, same car, or avoids main street. The sheer number of photos suggested this was not casual curiosity. Amelia had been keeping track of these people, and the organized way they were stored hinted at a deliberate purpose. Her family was baffled. They swore they had no idea why she would have such images, or who the subjects were. The discovery opened a new possibility, that Amelia herself had been investigating something, and whatever they had stumbled upon had now turned against her. Further analysis of the street security cameras provided another chilling clue. 2 nights before Amelia went missing, a dark-colored sedan was parked directly across from her house for nearly 4 hours. The driver never stepped out. When the footage was enhanced, a faint glint was caught in the driver's side window, a reflection of something pale. Investigators debated whether it was a trick of the light, but several agreed it looked like a mask, smooth and expressionless, facing toward the house. The image of someone silently watching Amelia's home for hours set off alarm bells. It was now increasingly likely she had been stalked, perhaps for weeks before the attack. Combined with the photographs in her garage, it was possible she had been aware of the threat and had been gathering her own evidence. Detectives tried to connect the dots. If Amelia had been investigating strangers, perhaps she had uncovered something dangerous, something worth killing for. The message scrawled on her bedroom wall, "Payback," could have been personal, but it could also have been a warning to anyone else who might try to expose the same truth. The working theory took shape. Amelia Clark had not been the victim of random violence. She had been targeted, possibly because she had information someone desperately needed to keep buried. And now, with her missing and the trail growing colder by the hour, the challenge for investigators was clear. They had to figure out what she knew, and fast, before they were dealing with not just an abduction but a murder. 3 weeks after Amelia Clark's disappearance, the case took its first major turn. A fisherman walking along the banks of the River Hallow noticed something wedged between a cluster of rocks. At first he thought it was just a torn handbag, but when he picked it up he found an ID card, a set of keys, and a small waterlogged notebook inside. The name on the ID left no doubt. It was Amelia's purse. The discovery reignited the investigation. Forensic teams examined the contents with meticulous care. The ID and keys showed no obvious signs of tampering. But the notebook was more intriguing. Most of its pages were blank, but a handful contained messy handwriting, as though written in a hurry. The notes were short dates, times, and initials, but no explanations. One particular entry stood out. Novan 2WR will finally pay. The date was just 4 days before Amelia vanished, and the initials became the next focus of the investigation. A database search quickly matched WR to Walter Ridge, a former construction worker who had grown up in Willow Creek before moving away for several years. Ridge had returned only a few months earlier, taking up residence in a small, isolated house on the edge of town. His name had surfaced in police records before he had been a suspect in a fatal hit-and-run 5 years ago, though charges were dropped for lack of evidence. His reputation was one of quiet hostility, someone who preferred to avoid attention but carried an underlying air of menace. When questioned, Ridge denied knowing Amelia or having any contact with her. He claimed he had been out of town visiting relatives during the time of her disappearance. His alibi began to crumble almost immediately. Neighbors reported seeing his car parked in his driveway the night Amelia vanished. Further, when investigators examined his vehicle, they found fibers in the trunk that matched the color and texture of Amelia's living room rug. The evidence against him deepened when a search warrant was executed on his property. In his shed, hidden beneath a tarp, officers discovered a crowbar with traces of blood on its handle. Forensic testing confirmed the blood was Amelia's. It seemed like the breakthrough everyone had been waiting for. The narrative was clear. Ridge had a history of violence, a possible grudge, and now possession of items linking him to the crime scene. Detectives began to prepare the case against him, convinced they were closing in on the killer. But then, something happened that shifted the entire investigation. 2 hikers exploring an abandoned quarry several miles from town stumbled upon what appeared to be a shallow grave. The local authorities were called immediately, and within hours the site was swarming with investigators. Beneath a thin layer of soil and rocks, the body of Amelia Clark was found. The condition of the remains confirmed she had endured extreme violence. Multiple fractures, deep cuts and bruises that suggested repeated beatings. But what disturbed the investigators most was the timeline. The medical examiner's report revealed that Amelia had died only about a week earlier. This meant she had been alive for nearly a month after her disappearance. The realization was chilling. While the town had been distributing missing person flyers and detectives had been narrowing in on Ridge, Amelia had been somewhere alive, suffering. Further analysis of the body revealed dirt from at least 2 different locations, indicating she had been moved multiple times. Her wrists and ankles bore marks consistent with prolonged restraint, suggesting she had been held captive. And then there was the detail that shifted the focus once more. DNA from a second unidentified individual was found under her fingernails. The new evidence complicated the story. If Ridge had taken Amelia, he had not acted alone. The presence of another person meant a second suspect was out there, someone who might have played an even bigger role in the prolonged captivity and eventual murder. The possibility that Amelia had been kept hidden by more than one perpetrator transformed the case from a seemingly straightforward abduction into something more intricate and disturbing. Investigators now had 2 urgent tasks: find the second suspect and determine whether the killing was motivated by personal revenge, as the payback message suggested, or by something larger and more sinister. The unsettling truth was that the discovery of Amelia's body answered one question, her fate, but opened the door to far darker possibilities about why she had been taken in the first place. The quarry where Amelia Clark's body was found became the center of a new and more urgent investigation. It was a grim, desolate place, with jagged stone walls and pools of stagnant water collecting in its uneven floor. The shallow grave where she had been hidden was hastily made, a crude attempt to conceal the body rather than a careful burial. Forensic teams documented every detail, collecting soil samples, photographing the site from every angle, and sifting through the surrounding dirt for any trace evidence the killers might have left behind. The autopsy painted a disturbing picture of her final days. Amelia had suffered multiple fractures to her ribs and arms, deep bruising across her torso, and severe lacerations to her back and legs. These injuries were consistent with repeated beatings, but there was more. The medical examiner determined that she had not been killed immediately after these assaults. Instead, she had survived for some time, her condition worsening over weeks until her eventual death. The cause was ultimately blunt force trauma to the head, delivered with such force it fractured her skull. The most haunting detail was the evidence that Amelia had been moved at least twice during her captivity. Dirt and debris collected from her clothing told a story of different environments, one with sandy, loose soil, the other with heavy, clay-like dirt. It suggested that she had been kept in at least 2 separate locations before being brought to the quarry. Investigators began to suspect that these moves were deliberate attempts to avoid detection, perhaps in response to police activity or to prevent her from being found too soon. Under her fingernails was the most important clue of all: DNA belonging to a second unidentified individual. This was not Walter Ridge. Whoever this second person was, Amelia had fought them hard enough to leave a trace. It shifted the theory of the case entirely. Ridge was no longer seen as the sole suspect, but part of a partnership, or worse, a larger network. Detectives revisited the photographs found in Amelia's garage, which now seemed even more significant. Many of the faces in those images remained unidentified, but several had been tentatively linked to missing persons reports from other towns in the region. Some cases dated back more than a decade. This raised the possibility that Amelia had uncovered evidence of a broader pattern of disappearances that had never been connected before. Attention soon turned to Ridge's known associates. Interviews with neighbors and acquaintances revealed that he frequently spent time with a man named Marcus Bell. Bell, a truck driver in his late 40s, was well-liked by some but described by others as reclusive and secretive. His job took him to distant towns and rural areas, often overnight, giving him both the mobility and opportunity to be involved in multiple crimes without drawing attention. Bell had no prior criminal record, but his name surfaced in several witness statements about Ridge's activities. He had been seen visiting Ridge's property late at night and was spotted in the same general area where Amelia was last seen alive. Investigators also discovered that Bell owned a parcel of remote land several miles from the quarry and that matched the description of one of the soil types found on Amelia's clothing. A search warrant was issued for Bell's property. When officers arrived, they found the farmhouse empty, but the outbuildings told a different story. In a large, weathered barn, a hidden room had been constructed behind a false wall. Inside were disturbing items: lengths of rope, stained pieces of fabric, and a small table scattered with photographs similar to those in Amelia's garage. Some of the images depicted individuals whose disappearances had never been solved. Forensic teams worked quickly, swabbing every surface for DNA and collecting anything that might link Bell to Amelia's murder. Among the items seized was a camera memory card, tucked into a small metal box. When the files were opened, investigators found a series of images taken in the weeks before Amelia's disappearance. The final photograph was the most chilling, grainy and slightly out of focus, but unmistakable. It showed Ridge and Bell standing side by side, both wearing smooth white masks, staring directly at the camera. This discovery reframed the entire case. Amelia had clearly been watching them and documenting what she saw. The message "payback" scrawled on her wall could have been their twisted way of responding to her heifer. It was now evident that the killing had not been an impulsive act, but a calculated move to silence her, and perhaps to send a warning to anyone else who might come too close. The scope of the crime had widened beyond a single murder. Detectives began to suspect that Ridge and Bell had been working together for years, possibly targeting multiple victims across different towns. The quiet streets of Willow Creek no longer felt safe, and the community braced itself for the next revelation, because if this was indeed a pattern, Amelia Clark was unlikely to have been their only victim. The evidence recovered from Marcus Bell's property became the final push investigators needed to piece together the truth about what had happened to Amelia Clark. For weeks, detectives had worked under the assumption that her death was the result of a personal conflict or an isolated act of violence. Now it was clear they were dealing with something far more calculated and sinister. The photographs, the hidden room, and the memory card suggested that Ridge and Bell had been involved in a long-running pattern of abductions, each one carefully concealed and likely connected to unsolved disappearances in nearby towns. The photographs found in the barn were laid out on a large table in the police evidence room. Investigators studied them one by one, matching faces to old missing persons cases. Some of the victims had vanished years apart, others within months of each other. None of the cases had ever been linked before, but here they were, each face captured in a similar style, as if documented for a personal collection. What chilled the detectives most was the discovery of Amelia's own photograph among them. It had been taken from a distance, her face partially obscured by the brim of a hat, but her identity was unmistakable. The date written on the back was nearly 6 months before her disappearance. The timeline revealed something disturbing. Amelia had been targeted long before she realized it. Her own investigation into suspicious disappearances, the photographs in her garage, and the notes in her notebook had likely been her attempt to understand what was happening around her. But by the time she recognized the danger, Ridge and Bell had already been watching her for months. Digital forensics on the memory card uncovered more than just the final photograph. A series of images showed the same dark sedan that had appeared in the street camera footage outside Amelia's house. In several shots, the vehicle was parked near hoarded areas or abandoned buildings, suggesting possible locations where victims had been taken. GPS data from Bell's truck logs further confirmed his presence in these areas around the time several other people went missing. The prosecution's case became a matter of connecting these pieces into a coherent narrative. Ridge and Bell operated as a team, with Ridge likely handling the abduction and physical control of their victims, while Bell's mobility allowed them to transport and hide people without arousing suspicion. The brutality of Amelia's injuries suggested she had resisted at every stage, and the DNA found under her fingernails provided direct physical evidence against Bell. When confronted with the evidence, Ridge refused to speak, staring coldly at the table during questioning. Bell initially claimed ignorance, but the mounting proof made his denials collapse. The rope fibers from the hidden room matched those found on Amelia's wrists. Soil samples from Bell's land matched one of the types found on her clothing. The image of both men wearing masks was enough to remove any doubt of their connection. The trial gripped the town. Reporters filled the courthouse steps each morning, their cameras capturing the faces of two men who had once blended easily into the background of Willow Creek. Witnesses testified about seeing the sedan near Amelia's house, hearing strange noises coming from Ridge's property late at night, and recalling odd behavior from Bell in the weeks before her disappearance. The forensic experts laid out the evidence in painstaking detail, from the fibers in Ridge's trunk to the final damning photograph. In the end, the jury deliberated for less than a day. Walter Ridge and Marcus Bell were both found guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and multiple counts of unlawful confinement. The judge sentenced them to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was a victory for the prosecution, but it did little to ease the unease that had settled over Willow Creek. The case had exposed a darkness that no one wanted to believe existed so close to home. For the investigators, this was one of those cases that would stay with them long after the files were closed. Not because of the violence alone, but because of the cruelty behind it. The months of stalking, the deliberate planning, the knowledge that Amelia had been alive and fighting for so long before the end. Her photographs and notes suggested she had been on the verge of exposing something much larger, perhaps even more victims before she was silenced. Willow Creek slowly returned to its routines in the months that followed, but the illusion of safety was gone. Residents locked their doors at night, avoided walking alone after dark, and looked twice at unfamiliar cars parked on their streets. Amelia's flower shop remained closed, its windows dusty and empty, a silent reminder of what had been lost. For those who had known her, the pain lingered, and for the investigators who had worked the case, the final image on Amelia's camera, two masked men staring directly into the lens, was burned into their memory, a stark warning of how evil can hide in plain sight until it decides to strike.